Hi, everybody. So, my article is called Learning Through Doing, a project based learning approach to the American Civil Rights Movement. It comes from the Social Education Journal, and the pages I will be talking about are 35 through 39. The authors are Diana Turk and Stacy Berman. This article was written in 2018. So, to start, this article highlights the significance of the instructional approach of project based learning. Project based learning can have such a positive impact on students' engagement since students will be able to show what they have learned in sustained, meaningful, and transferable ways. Project based learning focuses on the content of the curriculum and what students do with what they are learning. They are teacher shaped, however, student driven. The great thing about project based learning is that it allows for students to show what they learn rather than what teachers teach. Project based learning can be seen as essentially the main course of a meal. It's not the appetizer or dessert, it's the main course. So, project based learning has to be internally and externally authentic, meaning that it has to allow students to make disciplinary connections and connections to students' lives outside of the classroom. Project based learning enables students to connect with and deeply understand key events and trends in U.S. history and can make rich historical material accessible as well as exciting to a wide range of student learners. This article goes on about the unit of the civil rights movement and how a project based learning method would work. The goal was for students to be able to create a successful protest movement that they could demonstrate in their hometown or figure out an issue or a problem and draw on solutions to make that problem kind of go away. However, before they could get there, students needed to learn about the events in the 1950s and 1960s. But it was even more important to the teachers that students were able to internalize ideas and could make sense of them in the context of their own lives. The four essential questions are used in this case to drive inquiry even more. They are: what roles do the leaders, organizers, and masses all play in the movements of the civil rights era, and how can we evaluate their relative importance to the success of movements? In what ways did print, radio, and television media of the time help move the localized events of the time to a national attention? How can the mundane be transformative? What does it mean to argue that the power of the civil rights movement developed from mundane efforts, and what are the implications of such an argument? And lastly, why do we say that the civil rights movement is never ending? To wrap up, the article kind of just outlines the teaching activity that shows what is expected of students. Students should be able to evaluate the working significance of the organization's infrastructure and mundane acts that contributed to the U.S. civil rights movement's success. Then students should apply the lessons of the civil rights movement to problems in their own communities, as I mentioned earlier. The article also shows some realia, kind of showing what is an example of what students should be doing. There are a bunch of statistics on the Stop Criminalizing picture that shows the percentages of homeless individuals. The picture outlines ways students can start sympathizing and how to help. This is an example of something that a project-based learning instruction can create. So to finally wrap up about the summary, the article finishes with how this type of instruction has allowed students over the years to still attest to their engagement with the topic of the civil rights movement because they were able to learn so much and be so engaged while being able to create something that they personally connected with. So the instructional model being written about falls under the category of questions convergent according to figure 10.2 in UBD Chapter 10. The teacher is not lecturing or demonstrating or modeling. Instead, the essential questions are guiding this unit. To repeat the questions, they are: what roles did the leaders, organizers, and masses all play in the movements of the civil rights era, and how can we evaluate their relative importance of the success of the movements? And what ways did the print, radio, and television media of the time help move the localized events of time to national attention? How can the mundane be transformative? What does it mean to argue that the power of the civil rights movement developed from mundane efforts, and what are the implications of such an argument? And lastly, why do we say that the civil rights movement is never ending? So to start, students will work in groups to explore, evaluate, write about, and present the work of one of the civil rights organizations that the teachers outlined for them. Then in groups, students will discuss and evaluate the foundations of and efforts that reinforced the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 through 1956. Students will then identify and debate the work that went into initiating and continuing the boycott, including the development of transportation, communication, and financial networks, and whether these steps were necessary to perpetuate. After that, students will listen to protest songs and follow along with the lyrics. Each group is then assigned one song to discuss how it reflected the ideas, goals, issues of the civil rights movement, whether the artist advocated for a solution to African Americans' problems, and the impact of the African Americans' artist ownership of the music on the messages they conveyed. So we can see that this instructional plan is geared more towards guided inquiry. Students will question, research, conclude, support, and figure out solutions to the requirements of the task. The teacher should be providing feedback and coaching students as they work with their groups. Teachers should always be walking around the room to assess student knowledge. In groups, students will listen, consider, practice, retry, and refine based on the knowledge, the feedback that their teacher has given them. So these are essentially the mini projects for the students that allows them to be able to demonstrate their knowledge of the 4 essential questions for the project. As I mentioned, the 4 essential questions are what is making this project kind of tick. So the students apply the lessons of the past to problems that they wish to resolve in their own communities. In groups, students choose an issue, problem, or struggle that they see as an injustice in their own community. They research their solution, gather background information, and assert current concerns about and the impact of the issue they choose. Using this research, students create information boards or pamphlets presenting this material and offering potential solutions to the problem in an engaging, accessible, and informative manner. So to wrap up, I think this type of instructional method can be really effective for student engagement, since this will be something that students can relate to and take necessary action. If they are talking about something in their own community, they're obviously going to be able to relate and draw connections to it. I feel like this type of strategy allows students like myself that were also kind of afraid to engage or participate, to show what they have learned in a way that makes them have personal connections. I think whenever lessons can make students have personal connections in general, it's going to make them want to learn more. Like, for example, if I'm from Scotch Plains, so if I was doing a project on Scotch Plains, I would want to research as much as I can because it's my hometown, it's where I live, it's where I grew up. I kind of want to figure out more stuff about Scotch Plains and possible problems and how we could fix them. This unit has been carried out over the years with a project-based learning focus by the authors, which has shown the impact that it's had on students. I find it really interesting that years after students have studied the unit, the former students still attest to their engagement with the topic and how much they really enjoyed the unit. So it makes me wonder about how I can bring in project-based learning to my classroom and hope it could have the same results that I did for Turk and Berman. Thanks for listening.